fat pig!
Those two words destroyed Zuena long before her fiancé ever left her standing in that airport. For 2 years, the man she loved and his family picked apart her body, mocked her weight, and convinced her she would never be enough. She gave up her confidence, her career, and piece by piece, even herself, trying to become the woman they wanted. Then, on the morning of her wedding, he abandoned her at the airport without looking back, alone, crying in a wedding dress and drowning in humiliation. Zuena thought her life was over, but when a feared mafia boss named Mr. Gu, he didn't approach her. She was crying in a booth and didn't know he was there. He didn't offer comfort. He didn't ask if she was okay. Looking down at her through cold, emotionless eyes, he said,
"You're going to be a nuisance. Go do it somewhere else."
When she demanded to know if he also saw her as a fat pig, he stared at her in silence before changing her life with 5 words. "Come with me to Korea." She laughed. Then she realized he wasn't asking. Within minutes, armed guards were lifting her off her feet like she weighed nothing. She screamed for help. Airport security looked at Mr. Gu, bowed, and stepped aside. Dragged through a private terminal, she was forced onto a private jet, handcuffed to a leather seat, and flown thousands of miles away from everything she had ever known. Terrified, heartbroken, and trapped with the man who had kidnapped her, Zuena demanded to know why he had taken her. His answer sent chills down her spine. 365 days. I'll make you dangerous. What followed was a journey neither of them expected. A broken woman who believed she was worthless. A ruthless mafia boss who seemed incapable of compassion. And somewhere between the fear, the fights, the obsession, the gifts, the training, and the countless moments that should have driven her away, Zuena found herself falling helplessly in love with the very man who had stolen her from an airport, chained her to a seat on his private jet, and changed the course of her life forever. Before we dive into this unbelievable story, let me know in the comments, if a complete stranger offered to change your life with just 5 words, would you take the chance or run the other way? And if you enjoy powerful romance stories filled with betrayal, redemption, and unexpected love, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. The airport. The sound coming out of her didn't seem human. Zuena pressed her palms into the sticky synthetic leather of the corner booth, trying to anchor herself to something solid, something real. But her whole body was shaking, and the crying wouldn't stop. Not the pretty kind. Not the kind that made men want to save you. This was the kind that came from somewhere deep and rotten, the kind that emptied you out until there was nothing left but the echo of your own humiliation. Her wedding dress cream-colored, because white felt presumptuous for a second marriage bunched around her thighs. Mascara streaked her cheeks. She could taste salt and snot, and the bitter edge of her own grief. Fat pig. The words circled her mind like vultures. Baraka's mother had said it first, 2 years ago, her lips curling around the insult, like it was something delicious. Then his sisters. Then, eventually, Baraka himself, though he'd dressed it up in concern. Maybe if you lost some weight, Zuena. Maybe if you tried harder. She had tried. God, she had tried. And this morning that was supposed to be her wedding day, the fresh start, the redemption, he'd looked at her in the departures hall, his eyes flat and final, and said, "I can't do this." Then he'd walked through security without looking back. Her phone buzzed against the table. Another message. Another friend who'd known this was coming, who'd watched her walk toward this cliff edge and said nothing. Nima. Babe. Where are you? Are you okay? No, she was not okay. She was the punchline. The fool. The woman too desperate and too fat and too much to see that the man she'd given everything to her coding career, her apartment, her time, her body, her pride, had been planning his exit for months. The departure announcements hummed overhead in Swahili, then English. Seoul, Frankfurt, Nairobi. The whole world was leaving and she was stuck here, choking on her own tears in a corner booth that smelled like burnt coffee and someone else's perfume. She pressed her fists into her eyes. Breathe. Just breathe. If you're going to be a nuisance, go do it somewhere else. The voice cut through her grief like a blade, deep and cold and utterly unbothered, and Zuena's head snapped up. A man stood 3 feet away. No, not a man. Danger. That was the first word that landed. The second was expensive, tailored black suit that didn't have a single wrinkle. The kind of fabric that cost more than her rent. Dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from stone-sharp jaw, sharper cheekbones, lips pressed into a line that said he'd never smiled in his life and didn't plan to start now. His eyes were black, not brown, black, the kind of eyes that saw everything and gave nothing back. And behind him, Zuena's breath caught. 3 men. No, 4. All Korean. All built like they broke things professionally. All wearing the same dark suits, the same blank expressions, the same. She saw it then, just a flash as one of them shifted, the edge of a tattoo curling up his neck, disappearing beneath his collar. I said, the man repeated, his voice dropping another degree, take your crying somewhere else. You're in my spot. Something in Zuena snapped. Maybe it was the crying. Maybe it was the fact that she'd spent the last 2 years making herself smaller and quieter and less for a man who left her at an airport. Maybe it was the sheer audacity of this stranger, this cold, beautiful stranger, telling her to move like she was trash cluttering up his view. She stood, the wedding dress caught under her heel, and she stumbled. But she didn't care. She closed the distance between them, and up close he was taller than she'd thought, and she had to tip her chin up to meet his eyes. But she did it. She met them. Do you also see me as a fat pig? The question came out raw, broken. Every ounce of her humiliation poured into those 8 words. The man went very, very still. His gaze moved over her, slowly, deliberately, starting at her face, her tear-streaked, ruined face, and dragging down her shoulders, her chest, her waist, her hips, the full, curved weight of her that Baraka had looked at this morning and decided wasn't worth the flight. She waited for the disgust, waited for the dismissal, but when his eyes came back to hers, something had shifted behind them, something she couldn't name but could feel, like the air pressure changing before a storm. He didn't answer. Well, her voice cracked. Do you? Still nothing. And then the dam broke. She shoved him, both hands against his chest, hard enough that a normal man would have stumbled. He didn't. He absorbed it, his body solid as a wall. And she shoved him again, and the words started spilling out every curse she knew in Swahili and English. Every piece of her rage and grief converted into her fists, pounding against expensive fabric. And she was screaming now, and his guards were moving, hands going to their sides where she now saw the unmistakable shape of guns. They had guns. The man raised one hand. The guards froze. Zuena was breathing hard, her hands still pressed to his chest, and she could feel his heartbeat under her palms. Steady, slow, unbothered. He looked down at her like she was a curiosity, a problem he was trying to solve. Then he said 5 words that rearranged the entire universe. Come with me to Korea. She laughed. It came out strangled, half hysterical. What? Never. He didn't smile, didn't blink, just looked at her like her answer was irrelevant. Then he nodded. Once. The guards moved. Wait. Zuena started, but hands were already on her, lifting her off her feet like she weighed nothing at all, and she was screaming again, real fear flooding her now, and she twisted in their grip, her heel connecting with someone's shin, and she was yelling, "Let me go! Let me go!" And people were staring, and she saw an airport security guard moving toward them. Finally, "Help me," she screamed. "He's kidnapping me. Please." The security guard stopped, looked at the man in the suit, and bowed. The air went out of Suina's lungs. "Mr. Gu," the guard said in accented English, his head still lowered. "Is there a problem?" "Mr. Gu, what kind of name was that?" Didn't even look at him. "No problem," he said. His voice was the same temperature as before. Bored, almost. "Just taking care of something that belongs to me." "Of course, sir. Have a safe flight." The guard stepped back. Zuena's scream turned wordless. She thrashed, but the hands holding her were iron. And then they were moving through the airport, not toward security, toward the gates, and people were stepping aside, and she saw more bowing, more deference, and her mind was trying to catch up but couldn't. Who was he? What was he? They passed through a door marked private, and suddenly the noise of the airport cut off. Concrete hallway, fluorescent lights, the smell of jet fuel, a black car idling at the end. No, not a car. A town car. Sleek and dark, and the windows were tinted and she could see the tarmac beyond it, and a plane. Private jet. White and gleaming. Stairs already lowered. "No," Zuena said, and her voice finally broke. "No, please." I don't understand. The man, Mr. Gu, walked past her without a glance. Put her on the plane. Wait. She tried to twist toward him. What are you going to do with me? Kill me? Bury me? Shoot me? He paused at the base of the stairs, turned, looked at her for a long moment, and there was something in his expression now. Not quite a smile. Worse than a smile. That'd be mercy, he said quietly. Then he climbed the stairs and disappeared inside. The hands propelled her forward. She fought every step, kicking, scratching, begging, but it didn't matter. Nothing mattered. They carried her up the stairs, into the cabin that smelled like leather and something sweet she couldn't place, and they pressed her into a seat, and before she could lunge back up, cold metal clicked around her wrists, handcuffs secured to the armrest. No, she whispered. No, no, no. But the guards were already retreating. The door was sealing. The engine hummed to life beneath her. Across the cabin, Mr. Gu settled into a seat, picked up a magazine from the side table, and began to read, like this was normal, like he kidnapped women every day. Zuena's heart was a trapped bird, beating so hard she thought her ribs might crack. What do you want from me? Her voice came out thin, small. He turned a page, didn't look up. The plane started to taxi. Please, she tried again. I don't have any money. I'm nobody. I'm nothing. Why are you? You talk a lot, he said, still reading. Her mouth snapped shut. The plane turned onto the runway. The engine roar grew. She'd never been on a plane before, never been able to afford it, and terror spiked through her as the acceleration pressed her back into the leather seat. The ground fell away. Tanzania disappeared beneath clouds, and Zuena realized, with a clarity that made her want to vomit, that no one was coming to save her. No one even knew where she was. She looked at the man across from her, this stranger who'd looked at her body and seen something she didn't understand, who commanded airport security with a nod, who had armed men and a private jet, and forced the question out. What do you plan to do with me? He set the magazine down. Finally, he looked at her. His gaze was clinical, assessing, like she was a problem he was solving in real time. Then he leaned back in his seat, completely relaxed, and said the thing that truly terrified her, not because it sounded violent, but because it sounded certain. 365 days. I'll make you dangerous. The words landed like stones. I don't want none of that, she said, and her voice was shaking now. Everything was shaking. Just let me go. Please. I won't tell anyone, I swear. Just. He picked up the magazine again, turned the page. Done with the conversation. Zuena stared at him, at the sharp line of his jaw, the way his fingers moved across the glossy paper, the complete and utter indifference radiating from him like cold, and something crystallized in her chest. Not acceptance. Rage. She would survive this. Whatever this was, she would survive him, and then she would make him regret every second of it. Chapter 2. The handcuffs were starting to hurt. Not badly, not enough to mark, but the metal bit into her wrists every time she shifted, and Zuena had been shifting a lot in the past. She checked the small gold clock on the cabin wall. 90 minutes. 90 minutes since he'd kidnapped her. The word still felt surreal. Kidnapped. Like something from a movie. Not something that happened to women who wrote code and paid their taxes and tried so hard to be good. But here she was, 35,000 feet above the earth, handcuffed to a leather seat that probably cost more than her annual salary. Watching her captor read a magazine like this was a Sunday afternoon. Mr. Gu. She turned the name over, in her mind. Korean, obviously. But that didn't tell her anything useful. Didn't tell her why the airport security had bowed. Didn't tell her why he had guards with guns. Didn't tell her what the hell he wanted with her. 365 days. I'll make you dangerous. The words circled her thoughts, refusing to settle into anything coherent. Dangerous how? Dangerous to whom? And why her? She studied him from across the cabin. He'd removed his suit jacket, draped it over the seat beside him with the kind of careless precision that said he was used to people picking up after him. His shirt sleeves were rolled to his elbows now, exposing forearms that were lean and corded with muscle. And she could see the edge of something dark on his left wrist, a tattoo. Maybe disappearing beneath the fabric. He turned another page. Hadn't looked at her once since they'd taken off. That, somehow, was worse than if he'd been watching her. She cleared her throat. Nothing. Mr. Gu, she tried. He made a soft sound, not quite acknowledgement, not quite dismissal, but didn't look up. Her jaw tightened. I need to use the bathroom. That got his attention. His eyes lifted from the magazine, meeting hers with the same clinical assessment as before. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out a small key, and tossed it. It landed in her lap. Don't try anything stupid, he said, then went back to reading. Zuena stared at the key, at him, at the key again. Slowly, she unlocked one cuff, then the other. Her wrists were red, indented with thin lines, and she rubbed them as she stood, testing whether her legs would hold her. They did. Barely. She glanced at the cabin door, sealed. Obviously. They were in the air then, at the cockpit door ahead, also sealed. Then at Mr. Gu, who still wasn't looking at her. And she realized with a sinking feeling that he didn't need to watch her. There was nowhere to go. The bathroom was small, an absurdly luxurious marble sink, gold fixtures, hand towels that felt like silk. Zuena locked the door and braced her hands on the counter, staring at her reflection. She looked like hell. Mascara streaked down to her jaw, eyes red and swollen. Hair she'd spent hours on her hair this morning, twisting it into an elegant updo half-collapsed, pins dangling. And the dress. God. The cream-colored dress that was supposed to be her second chance now looked like a costume from a play that had ended badly. She turned on the faucet and scrubbed her face. The cold water helped, a little. She dried off, pulled the remaining pins from her hair, let it fall in its natural coils around her shoulders, smoothed the dress as best she could, looked at herself again. Still a mess, but a mess with a plan. She didn't have a plan. She pressed her forehead to the mirror and breathed. 365 days. A year. A year of... what? Captivity. Training. What did dangerous even mean to a man like him? You'll die here, a voice whispered in her mind. He'll use you up, and then... No. She shoved the thought away, straightened her spine, lifted her chin. Whatever he wanted, she wouldn't make it easy. When she emerged from the bathroom, Mr. Gu was pouring himself a drink from a crystal decanter, something amber and expensive looking. He didn't offer her any. She sat back down in her seat, didn't cuff herself again. He noticed. Of course he did. Smart girl, he said, swirling the liquor in his glass. Knowing when you're beaten. I'm not beaten. His mouth curved. Not a smile. Something sharper. Sure, she wanted to throw something at him. Instead, she forced her voice level. You said 365 days to make me dangerous. What does that mean? Exactly what it sounds like. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting. He took a sip of his drink, and she watched his throat move as he swallowed, and something hot and unwelcome twisted in her stomach. Don't. She looked away. Out the window. The sky was darkening, deep blue shading to black. The sun a red smear on the horizon. They were chasing the night, flying away from everything she knew. Do you do this often? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Do what? Kidnap women at airports. This time, he did smile. Just barely. Just enough to make her pulse stutter. You're my first, he said. Should I feel special? You should feel lucky. Lucky. She laughed sharp and bitter. Right. Because being handcuffed to a chair at 35,000 feet is every girl's dream. He set his glass down with deliberate care, leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and for the first time since they'd boarded, he looked at her, really looked. His gaze moved over her face, slow and thorough, and she felt it like a touch. You were crying in an airport, he said quietly. In a wedding dress, alone, abandoned, humiliated, about to go back to whatever small life you came from and spend the rest of your existence wondering why you weren't enough. Each word was a scalpel. She couldn't breathe. I'm offering you something better, he continued. You just don't know it yet. Better? Her voice cracked. You call this better? Yes. The certainty in his tone was infuriating. You don't know anything about me, she said. I know enough. You know nothing. I know, he said, leaning back again, that the man who left you at that airport is an idiot. And I know you're about to prove him right, if you keep sitting there feeling sorry for yourself. The words hit like a slap. Zuena surged to her feet. Fuck you. He raised an eyebrow. There she is. You don't get to... She was shaking now, rage and grief tangling into something she couldn't control. You don't get to judge me. You don't get to swoop in and decide my life for me. You don't. The plane shuddered. Turbulence sudden and violent, and Zuena stumbled, grabbing for the nearest seat. Her stomach dropped. The cabin tilted. The liquor in Mr. Gu's glass sloshed but didn't spill because, of course it didn't, because nothing rattled this man, but she was rattling, terror spiking through her because she'd never been on a plane before. And what if? Another jolt. She gasped, her knees buckling, and then, hands, steady and sure, catching her elbow, guiding her back into her seat. Mr. Gu crouched in front of her, one hand still on her arm, and his face was, not soft, exactly, but not cold anymore either. Breathe, he said. She couldn't. Zuena, her name in his mouth, low and certain. Breathe. How did he? She dragged in air, let it out, dragged in more. The turbulence smoothed, the cabin steadied. He was still crouching there, still touching her, and she could smell him now, something woody and dark, smoke and spice, and underneath it all, something clean, soap, maybe, or just him. She focused on that instead of the panic. Breathed it in. Better? He asked. She nodded. Didn't trust her voice. He stood, and she thought he'd move away. But instead he reached for her wrist, the one with the handcuff still dangling open, and unlocked it completely. Let it fall to the floor. You won't need these anymore, he said. She stared at him. Why? You're not going anywhere. It should have sounded like a threat. It didn't. He returned to his seat, picked up his magazine, and she sat there trying to pass what had just happened. He'd touched her, spoken her name, unlocked her. Small mercies. But why? The cabin lights dimmed automatically as night fell fully outside. A flight attendant appeared from somewhere. Zuena hadn't even realized there was anyone else on the plane and set a tray on the table between them. Food. It smelled incredible, but Zuena's stomach was still twisted in knots. Eat, Mr. Gu said without looking up. It's a long flight. I'm not hungry. Eat anyway. You can't just... I can. He turned a page. And I am. Eat. She wanted to refuse out of spite, but the food did smell good. And she hadn't eaten since. Yesterday? The day before? Time was a blur. She picked up the fork. The first bite was some kind of grilled fish, delicate and perfectly seasoned, and despite everything, it was good. She ate mechanically, not tasting after the first few bites, just fueling her body because what else was there to do? When she finished, the attendant reappeared, cleared the tray, and vanished again like a ghost. How long until we land? Zuena asked. Few more hours. Hours. She pulled her legs up onto the seat, wrapped her arms around her knees, watched the darkness outside the window. Somewhere out there was the Indian Ocean. Somewhere beyond that, Korea. A country she'd never thought about visiting. A life she'd never imagined. Why me? She asked quietly. Silence stretched. She thought he wouldn't answer. Then, you'll understand when we land. It wasn't an answer, but it was something. She rested her cheek on her knees and closed her eyes. And despite everything, the fear, the anger, the sheer unreality of it all, exhaustion pulled her under. When she woke, the plane was descending. Mr. Gu was watching her. Not reading. Not drinking. Just watching. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. A current. A question neither of them was asking. Welcome to your new life, he said softly. And then she looked out the window and saw it. Seoul, a galaxy of light spreading as far as she could see, dense and glowing and impossibly vast. Nothing like Dar es Salaam, nothing like anything she'd ever known. The city swallowed her whole before she even touched the ground. Teddy, Mr. Gu said, and she turned back to him confused. What? Your new name. Teddy. His mouth curved, just slightly. It's perfect. Heat flooded her face. Are you calling me fat? He stood, shrugged on his jacket with fluid grace. I'm calling you mine. And then the plane touched down, and there was no more time to argue. Chapter 3. The mansion. The cars were waiting on the tarmac. Not one car. Cars. Plural. 5 of them. Sleek and black and identical. Lined up like something out of a movie. Zuena descended the plane stairs on shaking legs, the Seoul air hitting her like a wall colder than Tanzania, sharper, carrying the smell of rain and asphalt and a million things she couldn't name. Mr. Gu walked past her without a glance, heading for the middle car. A man in a suit opened the door for him. Another man approached Zuena, gesturing to the same car. She hesitated. Problem? Mr. Gu's voice drifted back. Yes, everything about this is a problem. But she got in. The interior smelled like leather, and that same cologne she'd noticed on the plane, wood and smoke, and something darker. He sat on the opposite side, looking out his window as the motorcade pulled away from the airport. Zuena stared out her own window and tried to process what she was seeing. The highway was 8 lanes wide. Maybe more. Buildings rose on either side, illuminated with neon and digital screens that cycled through advertisements in Korean and English and languages she didn't recognize. Everything was fast, the traffic, the lights, the pulse of the city, and she felt small and lost and completely untethered. Being rich doesn't give you the right to kidnap people, she said. He finally looked at her. Rich, he repeated, like he was tasting the word, is an understatement. There was no arrogance in it. Just fact. The motorcade exited the highway, wound through streets that grew quieter, wider, lined with trees that looked sculpted. Then they turned through gates, massive iron things that swung open at their approach, and Zuena's breath caught. The estate spread before them like something from a dream, manicured lawns glowing under soft lights, a tree-lined drive that curved toward a mansion, not a house, a mansion with white stone and tall windows and architecture that mixed modern glass with traditional Korean lines, flower gardens even in early spring, fountains, uniformed staff already gathering near the entrance. It was obscene. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. The car stopped. Mr. Gu's door opened from the outside. One of the suited men, head slightly bowed, but instead of getting out, Mr. Gu walked around to her side of the car and opened her door himself. Zuena blinked up at him, confused. Behind him, she saw the guards had gone very still. The maids were whispering, heads bent together. Even the driver looked shocked. What? She asked. Nothing. He extended a hand to help her out. She ignored it, climbing out on her own, but she couldn't ignore the strangeness of the moment. You don't seem to open car doors very often, she said. His mouth quirked. I don't. Then why? Does it matter? She met his eyes, those black, fathomless eyes, and got completely lost in them. There was something there she couldn't name. Something that made her heartbeat stutter and her skin flush hot despite the cool air. Dangerous, she reminded herself. He's dangerous, but her body wasn't listening. Staring that way is dangerous. Teddy, he said quietly. The nickname snapped her back. Don't call me that, she said, gathering the skirt of her ridiculous wedding dress and marching toward the entrance with her chin high. I'm not your teddy bear. I'm not your anything. She heard him laugh quiet and low behind her. It did something confusing to her pulse. The entrance hall was all marble and high ceilings and a chandelier that looked like it cost more than her entire apartment building. Staff lined the walls, and they all bowed as Mr. Gu entered. Zuena slowed, taking it in. The wealth, the power, the sheer scale of it. Who was he? What was he? Someone will show you to your room, Mr. Gu said, already moving toward a staircase. Get some rest. We'll talk in the morning. Wait, but he was gone, disappearing up the stairs with 2 guards trailing him like shadows. Zuena stood in the entrance hall, surrounded by strangers in a country where she didn't speak the language, wearing a wedding dress from a wedding that never happened, and felt the full weight of her situation settle over her. She was alone, completely, utterly alone. Miss? A young woman approached, bowing slightly. She wore a neat uniform and spoke careful English. Please, come this way. Zuena followed, because what else could she do? They walked through hallways, lined with art, real art, the kind she'd only seen in books and past rooms, with doors open just enough to glimpse libraries and sitting rooms and spaces so large they felt wasteful. Finally, the maid stopped at a set of double doors at the end of a wing. Your room, miss, she said, pushing them open. Room. It was a suite. Bedroom with a bed large enough for 4 people. Sitting area. Ensuite bathroom she could see through an open door, all glass and stone. Windows overlooking the gardens. Closet that was probably bigger than her old bedroom. If you need anything, the maid said, there is a phone by the bed. Just dial 0. Then she bowed and left, closing the doors with a soft click. Zuena stood in the center of the room and slowly turned in a circle. This was a cage. A beautiful, luxurious cage, but still a cage. She walked to the window, pressed her forehead to the cool glass, and looked out at the gardens, at the lights, and the carefully cultivated beauty, and the high walls she could just barely see in the distance. "What have I gotten into?" she whispered. Her reflections stared back, and she barely recognized the woman looking at her. She couldn't sleep. How could she sleep? Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Baraka's face. The airport, Mr. Gu's guards lifting her like she weighed nothing. The city lights of Seoul swallowing her whole. 365 days. Zuena threw off the cover's silk, of course, because everything here was excessive, and paced the room, tried the door, unlocked. That was something. She stepped into the hallway, empty, silent except for the soft hum of climate control. She walked, no plan, no direction, just moving, because staying still felt like surrender. The hallway branched into another, and the mansion was a maze, and she was lost before she realized she should have been paying attention. Voices drifted from somewhere ahead, Korean, rapid and low. She followed the sound, turned a corner, and saw a door slightly ajar. Warm light spilled out. She moved closer, heard laughter guards, maybe off duty, and was about to turn back when she noticed another door. This one had a small window. She looked through it and saw dogs, big dogs, Rottweilers, at least 3 of them, in what looked like an indoor kennel. They were beautiful, sleek, and powerful, and one of them looked up, met her eyes through the glass. Its ears perked. Zuena smiled, despite herself. She'd always loved dogs, had begged for one as a child, but her family could never afford it. Maybe if she was quiet. She tried the handle. It opened. The moment she stepped inside, the barking started. Explosive, deafening. All 3 dogs on their feet, lunging toward her. And she'd made a terrible mistake. These weren't pets. They were guard dogs, and one of them was airborne, teeth bared, coming straight for her face. She screamed, turned, ran, slammed into something solid and warm, and her hands were grabbing, clinging, locking around. A body, Mr. Gu's body. She pressed herself against him, arms wrapping around his abdomen, face buried in his chest, and his heart beat steady and slow under her ear while hers tried to break free. "Sit," he said. One word. Quiet. Behind her, 3 thuds, as the dogs obeyed instantly. Silence. Zuena couldn't move, couldn't let go. Her whole body was shaking, and he was so solid, and she could smell him again, that cologne, that warmth, and she was clinging to her kidnapper like he was safety, and somewhere in her brain she knew this was wrong, but her body wouldn't listen. "You can let go now," he said. His voice rumbled through his chest. She didn't let go. "Teddy." She looked up. He was already looking down, and there was something in his expression she'd never seen before. Amusement, maybe, or something softer that she didn't trust. "I hate you," she whispered. His mouth curved. Took long enough, and somehow, the way he said it, like he'd been waiting for her to say it, like he was pleased, made her chest hurt. She stepped back, forced her hands to release him, straightened her spine. "You could have warned me about the dogs," she said. "I could have, but you didn't." "No, because you're an asshole." "Yes." He was smiling now, actually smiling, and it transformed his face, made him look younger, dangerous in an entirely different way. And Zuena needed to leave before she did something stupid like notice how beautiful he was. She pushed past him, back into the hallway. "Wrong way," he called after her. She stopped. "What?" "Your room. You're going the wrong direction. I can find it myself." "Can you?" She turned. He was leaning against the doorframe of the dog room, completely relaxed, and behind him the Rottweilers sat in a perfect row like this was a performance they'd rehearsed. "Fine," she bit out. "Where is it?" "Follow me." He pushed off the frame and walked past her, not checking to see if she followed. She did, because she didn't have a choice. They walked in silence, through the maze of hallways, and she tried to memorize the turns, but everything looked the same: expensive art, perfect lighting, cold elegance. Finally, they stopped at her door. "Here," he said. She reached for the handle. "Sylvana." She froze, turned. He was closer than she'd realized. Close enough that she could see the flecks of dark brown in his black eyes, could count his eyelashes if she wanted to. "Stay out of the West Wing," he said quietly. "That's where I sleep." Her pulse jumped. "Why would I? Just so you know, I don't care where you sleep." His gaze dropped to her mouth, lingered. "Don't you?" "Yes." "No." She didn't know. What do you intend on doing with that information, Teddy? He asked. And there was something dark and promising in his tone. She stepped forward instead of back. Testing. Brave, despite her better judgment. Stay where you are, he said. She took another step. Or what? Guyun Piu's Pov. This woman was going to be a problem. Junpyo had known it the moment he saw her in that airport, crying in a wedding dress with her whole heart on display. Had known it when she'd looked at him with those wounded eyes and asked if he thought she was a pig. Had known it when she'd fought his guards and screamed for help and refused to break even when the world made it clear no one was coming to save her. But this, her stepping closer when he told her to stay, her chin lifted in defiance, her eyes challenging him even though she was terrified. This was a different kind of problem, the kind he wanted to solve with his mouth. He moved 3 steps, and she was against the wall, her back pressed to silk wallpaper, his arm bracketed beside her head. He didn't touch her, didn't need to. The proximity was enough to make her breath hitch, her pupils dilate. Do you still plan on making a fuss? He asked, voice low. She opened her mouth, closed it. Her pulse fluttered at her throat, he could see it. Rapid and telling, and heat radiated from her skin. She was wearing one of the silk nightgowns the staff had left in her room, and it clung to her curves, and he'd spent the past hour in his office trying not to think about those curves. Failing. His perfume custom-made, expensive. The scent he'd worn for years without thinking twice about seemed to flood the space between them. He watched her breathe it in, watched her eyes go slightly unfocused. Good. Let her be as off balance as he felt. Well? He prompted. No, she whispered. No fuss. Smart girl. He should step back. Should let her go to bed and spend the night, not thinking about how she'd felt pressed against him when she ran from the dogs. Soft and warm and curved, exactly the way a woman should be. Instead, he leaned closer, just slightly, just enough that his breath moved her hair. Good night, Teddy, he murmured. Then he pushed off the wall and walked away before he did something monumentally stupid. Like kiss her, like find out if she tasted as sweet as she smelled, like ruin everything before it even started. He made it 10 steps before her voice stopped him. Junpyo, his name, not Mr. Gu, not Sir. Junpyo. He turned. She was still against the wall, her chest rising and falling too fast, her eyes wide and dark. What? He asked. Why did you really bring me here? The question hung between them. He could tell her the truth. Because I looked at you and saw something worth saving, or the partial truth. Because I need you for something you don't understand yet, or the lie, because I can. He chose none of them. Go to bed, he said. We have a long day tomorrow. And this time when he walked away, he didn't look back, even though he wanted to, even though he could feel her watching him until he turned the corner and disappeared from sight. Back in his room, the West Wing, where he'd told her not to go, Junpyo stripped off his shirt and stood at the window, looking out at the grounds he'd built from nothing. This empire, this life. He'd never brought a woman here, never wanted to. This was his sanctuary, his fortress. And in less than 12 hours, Zuena Amaniose had walked through it like she belonged, had run from his dog straight into his arms, had looked at him with those eyes that saw too much, and had asked why. He didn't have a good answer, just instinct, just the certainty that had struck him in that airport when she'd asked if he saw her as a pig, and he'd looked, really looked, and seen someone beautiful and broken and strong underneath the tears. Someone worth 365 days. Someone worth the risk. He pulled out his phone, sent a single text to his head of security. Tomorrow. Start her training. The response came immediately. Yes, sir. What kind of training? Junpyo smiled at the city lights. Everything. Chapter 4. The first week. The measuring tape was cold against her skin. Zuena stood in the center of her bedroom. Her bedroom, though nothing about this place felt like hers. While 5 women circled her, like she was a sculpture, they were appraising. They spoke rapid Korean to each other, pulling fabric swatches from bags, holding them up to her face, her shoulders, her hips. Too many hands, too much noise. She'd slept maybe 3 hours after the incident with Junpyo against the wall, and her nerves were stripped raw. Every touch of the tape measure felt invasive. Every measurement called out in Korean felt like judgment she couldn't understand. One of the women older, with kind eyes and grey threading through her black hair, noticed her shaking and said something soft. The others paused. We measure for new clothes, the woman said in careful English. Mr. Gu's orders. You need everything. Everything, like she'd arrived with nothing, which Zuena supposed she had. Just a wedding dress and humiliation. She nodded, unable to find words, and let them continue. The tape wrapped around her waist, pulling snug. The number called out, and shame crawled up her throat. She knew what they were seeing. The softness of her stomach, the thickness of her thighs, all the parts Baraka had looked at with increasing disgust over 2 years. That pig. Beautiful, the older woman said, and Zuena's eyes snapped to hers. What? The woman smiled, patting Zuena's hip with matter-of-fact approval. Beautiful shape. Good foundation. Mr. Gu has excellent taste. The words didn't compute. Before Zuena could respond, the door opened. The temperature dropped. All 5 women stopped mid-motion, heads turning, bodies already shifting into postures of deference. Junpyo stood in the doorway, suit different from yesterday, charcoal grey today, still perfectly tailored, and his gaze swept the room before landing on Zuena. She was standing there in her underwear and a silk robe that hung open. Heat flooded her face. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. There and gone before she could name it. Everyone out, he said. No raising his voice. No explanation. The women bowed and filed out immediately, taking their fabrics and measuring tapes and chatter with them. The door clicked shut. Silence pressed down. Zuena pulled the robe closed, tying it with shaking fingers. You can't just, how's your first day going? He leaned against the doorframe, all casual menace. How do you think it's going? She gestured at the room, at herself, at everything. I've been kidnapped. I'm being measured like livestock. I don't speak the language. I don't. You're staring again. She wasn't. Except she was. She'd been looking at his mouth while she talked. And now she couldn't look away. And her brain was supplying extremely unhelpful images of what that mouth had almost done last night when he'd had her against the wall. I'm not. She lied. His mouth curved. Sure. God. She hated him. Hated how he stood there so certain and untouchable. Hated how her body responded to his proximity despite everything, her pulse quickening, her skin warming, her breath going shallow. I'm leaving, he said. Her stomach dropped. What? Business. Hong Kong. Few days. The relief should have been immediate. Space. Distance. Time to think, without him crowding her thoughts. But what came instead felt dangerously close to disappointment. Okay, she managed. He pushed off the doorframe, crossed to where she stood, and she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. He was close enough that she could smell him again, that cologne. Wood and smoke and something addictive she couldn't name. He pulled something from his pocket. A phone. Sleek. Expensive. The kind she'd never been able to afford. My number is already programmed, he said, placing it in her hand. His fingers brushed hers just barely, just enough to send electricity up her arm. You need something, you call. She stared at the phone, at their almost touching hands. When will you be back? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Stupid. Stupid. Why did she care when he came back? His gaze sharpened. When you miss me, say the word. Never, she said immediately, but the word came out hollow. He knew it too. She could see it in the way his smile deepened, just slightly, just enough to make her want to hit him, or kiss him. She wasn't sure which. We'll see, he murmured. Then he turned and walked out, and she was left standing there with a phone in her hand and her heart doing complicated things in her chest. The days that followed developed a rhythm. Zuena woke at dawn, body clock still set to Tanzanian time, and found breakfast waiting in the formal dining room. Not Korean food. Tanzanian food. Chapati and maharagwe, mandazi and chai, dishes she hadn't tasted since leaving home. Prepared perfectly. The first morning, she'd cried into her chai. The chef, a Tanzanian woman named Amara who'd worked in high-end restaurants across East Africa before Junpyo hired her at Triple. Her previous salary had appeared from the kitchen, sat down across from Zuena without asking permission, and said, "He told me to cook you home, so I'm cooking you home." Why? Zuena had asked. Why would he do that? Amara had smiled. Because Mr. Gu pays attention, and what he pays attention to he keeps. The words sat strangely. After breakfast came the gym. Zuena had expected judgment, another space to be measured and found wanting. But her trainer was a black woman named Michelle, American, with muscles that looked carved from stone and a smile that was pure warmth. "We're not here to make you smaller," Michelle had said on day one, walking around Zuena with an assessing eye. "We're here to make you stronger." Big difference. And she'd meant it. The workouts were hard, harder than anything Zuena had ever done, but Michelle pushed her without shaming her, corrected her form without mockery, celebrated every small victory like it mattered. By day 3, Zuena's muscles screamed. By day 5, she started to feel them differently. Not as sources of shame, but as things that could do something. Lift. Push. Carry her own weight. Afternoons, she found the library. Someone Jun Pyo, obviously, though she tried not to think about him, failed constantly, had stocked it with coding books. The latest languages, algorithm theory, machine learning, everything she'd wanted to study but couldn't afford. She spent hours there, laptop open provided without her asking, fingers flying across keys, building something just for herself, a program, a small thing, but hers. For the first time since Baraka had convinced her to quit her job. "I'll take care of you, baby." She felt her mind sharpen, come alive. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. Evenings were harder. The mansion was too big, too quiet, and she wandered its halls like a ghost. Sometimes she passed the maids, who bowed and smiled. Sometimes she saw the guards, who nodded but never spoke. And sometimes, too often, she found herself standing at the edge of the West Wing, staring down the hallway that led to Jun Pyo's room, wondering. "Don't," she told herself. But her feet carried her closer anyway. She never went all the way, never crossed that invisible line. But she stood there in the dark, phone in her hand, his number glowing on the screen. "When you miss me, say the word." She didn't call, wouldn't give him the satisfaction. But on night 7, lying in bed too large for one person, staring at the ceiling while Seoul hummed beyond her window, she picked up the phone and held it close. "I miss you," she whispered to the empty room. "And I don't even know why." Her eyes drifted closed. "I don't even know you, but I miss you. How does that make sense?" Silence answered. She laughed, bitter and small. "I'm talking to myself. I'm losing my mind. You've made me lose my mind, and you're not even here." She set the phone down, rolled onto her side, pulled the silk sheets up to her chin. Sleep pulled her under slowly, and she didn't see the small red light blinking in the corner of the room. Didn't know the camera hidden in the smoke detector. Didn't know that 5,000 miles away, Jun Pyo sat in a Hong Kong hotel room with his phone pressed to his ear, listening to her whispered confession on a loop, his knuckles white where he gripped the armrest. Didn't know he stood up mid-playback, grabbed his jacket, and told his assistant to prep the jet. Didn't know he was already coming back. For here, Chapter 5. You said the word. Gu Yun Pyo's Peove. The meeting room in Hong Kong smelled like expensive cigars and expensive men making expensive deals. Jun Pyo sat at the head of the table, half listening to a white-haired executive drone on about profit margins and expansion opportunities into Southeast Asian markets, and watched his phone screen instead. The surveillance feed from Zuena's room played on mute. She was pacing, hair loose around her shoulders, wearing one of the silk nightgowns he'd had delivered, the fabric clinging to curves that had occupied far too much of his thoughts over the past week. He should be focused on this deal. 40 million USD, 3 new shipping routes, legitimate business that would wash another stream of his less legitimate income. But all he could think about was whether she'd eaten dinner, whether Michelle was pushing her too hard in training, whether she was settling in or planning escape routes, whether she'd called. She hadn't. Stubborn woman. On screen, she stopped pacing and sat on the bed, picking up the phone he'd given her. Jun Pyo's attention sharpened. She stared at it for a long moment, her thumb hovering over the screen. Do it, he thought. Just do it. She set it down. He exhaled. Across the table, someone asked him a question. He didn't hear it. Mr. Gu, his second-in-command, Kang, prompted carefully. Jun Pyo looked up. Reschedule. The room went silent. Sir, the white-haired executive blinked. We've been negotiating this for 6 months. We're ready to sign tonight. And now we're not. Reschedule. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked out while 12 men sat frozen in confusion. Kang caught up to him in the hallway. Boss? What's? Jun Pyo pulled out his phone, opened the surveillance app, turned up the volume. Zuena's voice filled the space between them. I miss you and I don't even know why. Kang's eyebrows rose. Junpyo was already walking toward the elevator. Get the jet ready. We're leaving. Now? Now. But the deal isn't as important as getting back to Seoul. He pressed the elevator button, jaw tight. She said the word. Kang knew better than to argue. The flight back was 7 hours of Junpyo sitting in the dark cabin, listening to her whispered confession on repeat, like a man possessed. I don't even know you, but I miss you. He should delete the surveillance footage, should feel guilty for invading her privacy like this. He didn't, couldn't, not when every word she spoke carved itself into his chest like a brand. When had he become this? This man who flew across oceans because a woman he barely knew said she missed him. This man who cancelled million-dollar deals to sit in the dark and watch her sleep. The old Junpyo, the one forged in orphanage fights and street corners, the one who'd built an empire with blood and ruthlessness, would have laughed. But that Junpyo had never met Zuena Amani Ose, had never seen her cry in an airport and felt something crack in his chest, had never looked at her and thought, mine. The jet landed at dawn. Seoul air hit him cold and sharp as he descended the stairs, and the motorcade was already waiting. He didn't go to his office, didn't go to the mansion's main entrance, went straight to her wing. The guards stationed outside her door straightened when they saw him, surprise flickering across their faces. Sir, we didn't know you were. Out, he said quietly. They left. Junpyo stood outside her door, hand on the handle, and hesitated. What was he doing? What did he want from this? He didn't have answers, just the certainty that had been driving him since that airport. She's mine to protect, mine to remake. Mine. He opened the door. Something was wrong. Zuena woke in the dark with her heart already pounding, body flooded with adrenaline she couldn't explain. The room was silent. The mansion was silent. Everything was exactly as it should be. Except, there, a silhouette in the chair by the window. Someone was in her room. The scream tore out of her before she could stop it. The figure moved, and then the bedside lamp clicked on. And Junpyo, sitting in the chair like he belonged there. One ankle crossed over his knee, jacket discarded, shirt sleeves rolled up, looking at her with those fathomless black eyes like her screaming was a mild inconvenience. What? She pressed a hand to her racing heart. What are you doing here? You said the word. His voice was rough, tired, like he hadn't slept. What word? Hey, you miss me. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. And you don't know why. I came to give you a reason. The words hung in the air between them. Zuena's brain was trying to catch up. He was here, in her room, in the middle of the night, and he looked different. Hair, slightly mussed, shadows under his eyes. The careful control he always wore like armor showing cracks at the edges. How did you? She stopped, went cold. You were listening. No denial in his expression. No shame either. You bugged my room, she said slowly, rage building. You bugged my room. Yes, just that. Just yes. Like it was reasonable. You bastard. She threw the covers off, started to get up, and then remembered what she was wearing. The silk nightgown, short, thin, leaving very little to the imagination. Junpyo's gaze tracked down her body and back up, slow and deliberate, and his jaw went tight. You should get back in bed, he said, voice dropping an octave. You should get out. Probably. He didn't move. Neither did she. The room felt too small suddenly, too warm. She could smell him from here, that cologne, wood and smoke, and underneath it something earthier, like he'd been traveling, like he'd crossed an ocean. He crossed an ocean. The realization landed. You were in Hong Kong, she said. Yes, and you came back. Tonight. Because I said. She couldn't finish. Because you said you missed me. He stood, and the room shrank further. And I wanted to give you a reason why. He crossed toward her. 3 steps. That's all it took for him to close the distance. And then he was there, close enough to touch, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. And she was breathing too fast, and he was breathing too slow, and the air between them hummed. What reason? She whispered. His hand came up slowly, giving her time to move away, and his fingers traced her jawline. Feather light, barely there, but she felt it everywhere. This, he said quietly. His thumb brushed across her lower lip, and her breath caught. The way you look at me when you think I'm not watching. His fingers trailed down her throat, resting at her pulse point. The way your heart beats faster when I'm close. It was beating faster. Thundering, actually. The way you feel, he continued, voice going rough, even though you hate that you do. I don't. You do. His other hand came up, framing her face, and she was caught, pinned in place by his gaze. You feel it the same way I do. This whatever this is. You kidnapped me, she breathed. I know. You're holding me prisoner. Are you a prisoner, Teddy? His thumbs stroked her cheekbones. The doors are unlocked. The guards would let you leave if you asked. You have money, a phone, freedom to go anywhere in the city. Her mind stuttered. What? You're not a prisoner. He leaned closer, until his forehead almost touched hers. You're a choice you haven't made yet. That's not. You can't just tell me to leave, he interrupted. Tell me you want me gone. Mean it, and I'll go. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out, because the truth, the devastating, impossible truth was that she didn't want him to leave. She wanted him to stay, wanted him closer, wanted things she had no right to want from a man who'd stolen her from an airport and promised to make her dangerous. I hate you, she whispered. I know. I should hate you. You should. So why don't I? Something shifted in his expression, cracked open, and for just a moment, she saw past the cold control to something raw underneath. Same reason I flew 7 hours to sit in your room and watch you sleep, he said. No good reason at all. Her hands moved before she could think, reaching up, fingers curling into his shirt, and she didn't know if she was pulling him closer or pushing him away. But then his hands were in her hair, and his breath was on her lips, and he stepped back, fast, put 3 feet of distance between them like she'd burned him. I should go, he said roughly. What? No, Look at what you're wearing, Teddy. She looked down. The nightgown was even more revealing than she'd thought. Silk, clinging to every curve. The hem riding high on her thighs, the neckline low enough to show. Oh. Heat flooded her face. See you in the morning, Junpyo said, already moving toward the door. You look good in that, by the way. His hand met the door handle. Stay, she heard herself say. He froze, turned his head slightly, not quite looking back. What? Stay. Her voice shook. Please. The silence stretched. Then. Not tonight. Teddy. Why? He did look back then, and the heat in his gaze nearly knocked her over. Because if I stay, he said carefully, I'm not going to be able to keep my hands off you, and you're not ready for that yet. What if I am? His laugh was short, pained. You're not. Trust me. I'm not a child. I know exactly what you are. His knuckles went white on the door handle, which is why I'm leaving. Before I do something we'll both regret. I wouldn't. Good night, Zuena. He walked out. The door clicked shut behind him, and she stood there in the middle of her room, heart pounding, body aching, mind reeling. She'd asked him to stay. He'd said no, for her sake, to protect her from him. She should be grateful, should be relieved. Instead, she felt hollow, cheated, like something vital had slipped through her fingers. Zuena climbed back into bed and pulled the covers up, but sleep wouldn't come. She lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying every word, every touch, every moment, and somewhere in the mansion, she knew he was doing the same. Chapter 6. The kiss. Avoiding Junpyo became Zuena's full-time job. She mapped his schedule through careful observation. Breakfast at 7, meetings in his home office from 8 to noon, lunch at 1, more meetings until 5. She rearranged her entire routine around the gaps, ran at 6 instead of 8, ate breakfast at 6:30. Before he came down, spent mornings in the library, afternoons in the gym, evenings in her room. If she heard his voice in the hallway, she went the other direction. If she saw him in the distance, she turned around. For 3 days, she successfully avoided being in the same room with him. It was working perfectly, except she was thinking about him constantly. Every run, she wondered if he was watching from his office window. Every meal, she noticed the empty chair across from her. Every night, she lay in bed and remembered his hands in her hair, his breath on her lips, the way he'd looked at her like she was something precious before walking away. Before I do something we'll both regret. Would she regret it? She didn't know, didn't want to examine why the answer wasn't an immediate yes. On day 12, her luck ran out. She finished her morning run, 6 miles today, a new record. her lungs burning and her legs shaking, but she'd done it and headed back inside through the garden entrance. Sweat-damp sports bra and leggings, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, no makeup, breathing hard. She turned the corner to the hallway that led to her wing. He was waiting, leaning against the wall outside her door, arms crossed, still, in sleep clothes, black pants, and a white t-shirt that did absolutely nothing to hide the lean muscle underneath, like he'd been waiting a while. Her steps faltered. "You've been avoiding me," he said. "No, I haven't. You're a terrible liar." She tried to walk past him. "Excuse me, I need to." His hand caught her arm. Not hard, just enough to stop her. 3 days, he said quietly. "You've successfully dodged me for 3 days. Impressive." "I don't know what you're talking about." He turned her to face him, and up close, she could see he hadn't shaved. Stubble shadowed his jaw, and there were still shadows under his eyes, and he looked almost human. "Your heart is beating very loudly," he observed. "I just ran 6 miles. That's not why." His thumb stroked the inside of her wrist, right over her pulse. "Do you like me, Teddy?" The question landed like a bomb. "No," she said immediately. "No? You're dangerous, arrogant. You kidnapped me. You bugged my room. You." He kissed her. One moment she was listing his faults, and the next his mouth was on hers and the world stopped. His lips were softer than she'd imagined, firm but gentle, tasting like mint and something darker, and his hand came up to cup the back of her head, while the other settled at her waist, pulling her closer, and she made a sound surprise or surrender. She didn't know, and then she was kissing him back, her hands fisted in his shirt. His tongue traced her lower lip, asking, and she opened for him, and the kiss deepened into something that made her knees weak. He kissed like he did everything else, with absolute certainty and devastating control. But underneath it, she felt something else, something desperate, like he'd been starving for this. For here, the thought made her dizzy. Or maybe that was just the kiss. She couldn't breathe, didn't care, just pressed closer, tasted deeper, and felt herself falling into something she couldn't name. Reality crashed back. Zuena wrenched away and slapped him. Hard. The crack echoed in the hallway. Junpyo's head snapped to the side. A red mark bloomed on his cheek. Behind him, one of the guards stepped forward, hand going to his weapon. "Don't," Junpyo said without looking. The guard froze. Junpyo touched his jaw, almost smiling. "Feel better?" "Yes," she lied. "Good." Then he reached for her again, and panic spiked, not fear of him, fear of herself, of what she'd do if he kissed her again. She ran, grabbed her door handle, threw herself inside, slammed it shut, and locked it. Then she stood there with her back against the wood, breathing hard, fingers pressed to her lips. They were swollen, tingling. She could still taste him. Cherries. Her mind supplied stupidly. He said, "You taste like cherries." No, he hadn't. Except, she looked down and saw her phone on the side table, picked it up. A notification glowed on the screen. A text from an unknown number. "You taste like cherries. I'll be thinking about that." Her breath left in a rush. Another text came through while she stared. "Also, you have a good right hook. Next time, don't telegraph it. Element of surprise is everything." She wanted to throw the phone, wanted to text back something cutting and harsh. Instead, she saved his number and sank onto the bed, pressing her burning face into her hands. This was a disaster. He was a disaster, and she'd kissed him back. Worse, she wanted to do it again. Chapter 7. Gifts and Ghosts. Go Junpyo's Pove. The board meeting was a disaster. Junpyo sat at the head of the conference table, 12 executives waiting for his input on the quarterly reports, and all he could think about was cherries. The way Zuena had tasted when he'd finally kissed her. Sweet and startled and perfect. The way she'd kissed him back for exactly 7 seconds before slapping him hard enough that his jaw still ached. He touched his lips without thinking. "Mr. Gu?" The CFO's voice cut through. "Your thoughts on the Singapore expansion?" Junpyo blinked. Looked down at the reports he hadn't read. "Approved," he said. "Next item." The executives exchanged glances. He never approved things without questions, without negotiations, without making someone sweat. But today he just wanted this meeting over so he could... What? Go find Zuena? She was avoiding him again, even more successfully than before. Kiss her again? She'd probably slap him harder. figure out why one woman had turned his entire carefully controlled world into chaos. The meeting dragged on. Finally it ended. And Junpyo returned to his office and stood at the window, looking out at the grounds. He could see her, in the garden, sitting on a bench with her laptop, completely absorbed. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, and even from here he could see the concentration on her face. She was coding, building something, becoming something. Dangerous, he'd promised, but she was already dangerous. To him, at least. He pulled out his phone and made 3 calls. First, to the best coding tutor in Seoul. Private sessions, starting tomorrow, price irrelevant. Second, to his personal shopper. Dresses. For a woman who's never been told she's beautiful, make her believe it. Third, to the florist. Flowers. Every morning, with notes. What should the notes say, Mr. Gu? He thought about Baraka Ose leaving her in an airport, about the question she'd asked. Do you also see me as a fat pig? Tell her she's perfect, he said. Every part of her. Make her believe it. The gifts started arriving the next morning. He didn't go to her, didn't push, just sent tangible proof that he was thinking about her, and waited. The first dress arrived on day 14. Zuena opened the box to find emerald green silk that looked like it cost more than her old apartment's annual rent. A note card tucked inside, handwritten in elegant script. Your body is perfect now and after. Jay. She stared at it for a long time, ran her fingers over the fabric, tried it on in private, and stood in front of the mirror, barely recognizing the woman looking back. The dress fit like it was made for her, because it was made for her, tailored exactly to measurements that included every curve, every soft place, every part of her that Baraka had criticized. And it was beautiful. She was beautiful. The thought felt revolutionary. The flowers came the next morning. White roses and something purple she didn't recognize, arranged in crystal. Another note. You have your father's eyes and your mother's strength. Both are stunning. Jay. How did he know about her parents? How did he know anything? She kept the flowers by her bed. More gifts followed. Books on advanced coding theory. A new laptop with specs that made her gasp. Running shoes in exactly her size. A leather journal with her initials embossed in gold. And always the notes. Smart is the best kind of dangerous. I think about your laugh. You should do it more. You're terrifying when you're angry. I like it. Zuena told herself she wouldn't let this sway her. Told herself gifts didn't erase kidnapping. But she caught herself smiling at mirrors, wearing the dresses when she thought no one was watching, rereading the notes before bed. By day 18, she'd stopped avoiding him entirely, started timing her breakfast to coincide with his. They didn't talk much. Just ate in charged silence, stealing glances, the air between them electric. Once, their hands brushed, reaching for the same serving dish. Once, she laughed at something Amara said from the kitchen, and she looked up to find him staring like he'd never heard anything better. Once, she asked him about the coding tutor, an older Korean woman named Dr. Park, who was brilliant and exacting and made Zuena's mind times sing times, and he said simply, "You needed her. So I found her." Like it was that easy. Like she was worth crossing the world for. Zuena was falling, hard and fast and terrifyingly, for a man who'd stolen her, who'd promised to make her dangerous, who looked at her like she was the only thing in the room worth seeing. She was so lost in the fall that she almost missed it. Day 20. Evening. She was walking past the guard station, a small room off the main hallway where the security team rotated shifts, when she heard his name. "Mr. Gu's at the club tonight," one guard said in English. They often switched to English when they thought she wasn't listening, not realizing she'd started picking up Korean from her tutor. Again, another guard laughed. "Third time this week. He's got his usual table. Usual drinks. Usual company. 2 girls this time. Always 2. Brunette and the redhead. He's got good taste." Something cold wrapped around Zuena's chest. She kept walking, didn't run, didn't react, just made it to her room, closed the door, and stood very still. The club, 2 girls, usual company. Of course. What had she thought? That the gifts meant something. That the kiss meant something. That she was special. She was in Time's acquisition. A project. 365 days of making her dangerous, and then what? He'd let her go and return to his club and his 2 girls and his real life. The pain was sharper than it should be, sharper than she had any right to feel. She looked at herself in the mirror in one of the dresses he'd sent, her hair styled the way he'd complimented, her body stronger but still soft, still times her times, and made a decision. If he wanted to play games, she'd play, but by her rules. Zuena opened her closet and pulled out the one dress she'd been too afraid to wear. Black, short, hugging every curve like a second skin. Gold heels, red lipstick, makeup that transformed her from soft to sharp. She studied her reflection, didn't recognize the woman staring back. Perfect. She grabbed her phone and headed for the garage. The new driver, young, nervous, clearly not yet trained in the mansion's protocols, was easy. "I need to go out," she said with the kind of confidence she didn't feel. I should check with who? Mr. Gu?" She smiled. "He's busy, and I'm bored. Unless you want to explain to him why you refused me." The driver's face went pale. 10 minutes later, she was in the back of a town car, headed for the club, and Junpyo had no idea what was coming. Chapter 8. The club. The bass hit her like a physical thing. Zuena stepped through the entrance of the club, all black marble and red lighting and bodies pressed together in the dark, and felt the music vibrate through her chest. The air smelled like expensive alcohol and expensive cologne, and the particular electricity of people, pretending they weren't hunting each other. She'd never been to a place like this, would have been invisible in a place like this before. But tonight, in this dress that clung to every curve she'd spent 2 years being ashamed of, in these heels that made her legs look endless, with this makeup that transformed her face into something sharp and dangerous, she wasn't invisible. Heads turned as she walked deeper into the club. Men's gazes tracked her movement. Women assessed her with the quick, brutal efficiency of competition. "Good," she thought savagely. "See me, all of you." But there was only one person she wanted to see her. Zuena scanned the space, heart pounding beneath her ribs, and found him exactly where the guards had said he'd be. The VIP section, elevated above the main floor, separated by velvet ropes and men in black suits who looked like they killed people for a living. Probably did. Junpyo sat in the center of a curved booth, legs spread in that casual display of ownership men like him wore like a second skin. Dark shirt, darker eyes, a glass of amber liquid in one hand, and on either side of him, women, 2 of them, beautiful in the way that came from money and maintenance. The brunette had legs for days and a smile that promised things. The redhead wore a dress that was barely there and kept touching his arm while she laughed at something he said. Zuena's stomach turned to ice, then fire. She'd known, logically, that a man like Junpyo had women, had a life, had routines that didn't include the broken woman he'd picked up at an airport and decided to remake. But knowing and times seeing times were different animals entirely. The redhead leaned closer, whispered something in his ear. He didn't pull away. Something in Zuena's chest cracked open. "Move," she told herself. "You came here for a reason. So move." She descended the steps to the dance floor. The music shifted something with a heavy beat that she felt in her bones, and she let it pull her in. Started moving. Nothing practiced, nothing graceful. Just her body responding to rhythm the way it wanted to, the way she'd never let it before. Freedom tasted like rage. A man appeared at her side. Korean, mid-30s, handsome in an unremarkable way. He smiled and said something she didn't understand over the music. She smiled back, let him take that as invitation. He moved closer, and she turned, putting her back to him, still dancing, and she could feel his gaze on her body, and she didn't care. Let him look. Let everyone look. Let Junpyo see exactly what he was missing while he sat in his booth with his usual company. The man's hand found her waist. She let it stay there. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a voice screamed that this was stupid, reckless, dangerous times, but she shoved it down and tilted her head back and let the music drown everything else out. For exactly 7 seconds. Then she felt it. The weight of a gaze that was nothing like the stranger's casual interest. This gaze had time's teeth. Zuena turned her head, looked up at the VIP section, and found Junpyo staring directly at her. The women on either side of him might as well have disappeared. His entire focus had narrowed to a single point. Her. Their eyes locked across the dance floor, across the base and the bodies and the space between them. And even from this distance she could see his expression shift into something that made her pulse spike. Recognition. Possession. Fury. She smiled, turned back to the stranger, and deliberately took his hand from her waist and guided it lower to her hip while maintaining eye contact with Junpyo. "Your move," The gunshot was so loud it made her ears ring. The music cut off, mid-beat. Screaming started high and panicked, and then the club was times moving. Bodies stampeding toward exits. Drinks abandoned. Chaos erupting like a kicked anthill. The stranger's hand vanished from her hip. When Zuena spun around, he was gone. Everyone was gone. The dance floor cleared in less than 30 seconds, leaving her standing alone in the center while the emergency lights flickered on and the bass drum of her heartbeat filled the sudden silence. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. She turned. Junpyo walked toward her through the empty club, gun still in his hand, hanging loose at his side. The VIP section behind him was abandoned. The women fled, the guards waiting at a distance, no one stupid enough to get between him and whatever was about to happen. He looked like violence given human form. "Do you have any idea," he said, voice perfectly level, perfectly cold, "what you've just done?" She lifted her chin. "I went dancing. You let another man touch you." "So?" The word came out sharp, defiant. "You had two women draped over you like accessories. Why do you care if someone touches me?" He was close now, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. Close enough that she could see the muscle ticking in his jaw, the absolute control it was taking him not to. "Not to what?" "Those women," he said carefully, "are business associates' daughters. That's a monthly networking dinner I've attended for 3 years. It means times nothing. Looked like something to me. You're jealous. I'm times leaving." She tried to move past him. His hand caught her wrist, not hard, never hard, but immovable. "Where do you think you're going?" "Away from you." She yanked against his grip. "Futile. Let me go." "No. Let me times go, Junpyo. Not until you understand what you've done." He stepped closer, and she could smell him now, that cologne mixed with gunpowder and something sharper, adrenaline maybe. "Not until you understand what you've made me do." Fear spiked. "What are you?" "That man." His voice dropped to something that barely qualified as sound. "The one who had his hands on you. Do you know what happens to people who touch what's mine?" The possessive pronouns sent lightning down her spine. "I'm not. You times are." His free hand came up, knuckles brushing her cheek with devastating gentleness that contradicted everything else about this moment. "You've been mine since the airport. Since you asked me if I thought you were a pig, and I looked at you and knew times that I'd burn down the world before I let it break you further." Her breath caught. "So when I see another man touching you," he continued, voice going rough, "when I see you times letting times him touch you just to make me feel something, I do feel something, Teddy. I feel times everything." "What did you do?" she whispered. He smiled. It was the worst thing she'd ever seen. "What I had to," he said simply. Then he released her wrist and walked away, leaving her standing in an empty club with her heart in her throat and the sick certainty that she'd just made a terrible mistake. The driver was silent on the ride back to the mansion. Zuena sat in the back seat, arms wrapped around herself, the adrenaline crash making her shake. The city lights blurred past the window, neon and glass, and a million lives that had nothing to do with hers. What had she done? She'd wanted to make him jealous, to prove she had power too, to show him she wasn't just some project he could control. But the look in his eyes when he'd walked toward her, that wasn't jealousy. That was something far more dangerous. "You've made me do." Pace tense, like it was already done. The mansion loomed ahead, lit up like a palace, beautiful and cold. The car stopped. Zuena climbed out without waiting for anyone to open her door and went straight to her room, peeling off the dress and the heels and the makeup like she could shed what had happened with them. She stood under the shower until the water ran cold, climbed into bed, couldn't sleep. At some point 3 a.m., 4, she'd lost track. She reached for her phone. The screen lit up with a news notification. "Breaking. Body found in Gangnam. Male. 30s. Single gunshot wound. Police investigating." Below it, a photo. The stranger from the club. Zuena's phone slipped from her fingers. She made it to the bathroom just in time to vomit. Chapter 9. Every action. She didn't remember the walk to his room. One moment Zuena was staring at the news article, bile in her throat and horror in her chest. And the next she was storming through the mansion's west wing, past guards who tried to stop her, past locked doors she somehow knew how to find, until she was standing in front of his door. She didn't knock, just pushed it open. Junpyo stood in the center of a bedroom 3 times the size of hers. wearing nothing but a towel slung low on his hips, hair wet and dripping, and he turned at her entrance with no surprise on his face, like he'd been expecting her. "You killed him," she said. Water ran down his chest, following the lines of muscle she'd never seen before, disappearing beneath the towel, and her brain tried to catalogue the unexpected beauty of him before she shoved the thought away. "Yes," he said simply. Not a denial, not an excuse, just times yes, like it was the most natural thing in the world. He was just a man at a club. Her voice shook. He didn't do times anything. He touched you, so you times killed times him? Yes. The word landed like a stone. Zuena pressed her hands to her face, trying to breathe, trying to process. "You're insane. You're a psychopath. You're turning around," he interrupted. "You should probably turn around." "What?" "I'm getting dressed, unless you want to watch." Heat flooded her face despite everything, despite the horror, despite the news article, despite the fact that a man was times dead times because she'd danced with him. She spun to face the door, heard the rustle of fabric behind her, the slide of a zipper, the quiet sounds of him dressing while she stood there trying not to fall apart. "You can look now," he said. She turned. He'd dressed in all black slacks and a fitted shirt that somehow made him look more dangerous than the towel had. His hair was still damp, pushed back from his face, and his expression was completely calm. "Every action has consequences," he said, like he was explaining basic physics. "You went to that club to make me feel something. You succeeded. This is what that looks like. This is times murder. This is protection." "Protection?" She laughed, sharp and broken. "You're protecting me by killing people?" "Yes." The certainty in his voice made her want to scream. "I didn't ask for this," she said. "I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't ask you to kidnap me, or to care, or to kill people who I know." "Then why?" "Because I don't know how to do this any other way." He moved closer, and she should step back but couldn't. "Because the world I come from, people who disrespect what's mine don't get warnings. They get eliminated. I'm not a times thing times you own." "No," he agreed. "You're so much worse than that." The words hung between them. "What does that mean?" she whispered. He looked at her for a long moment, something warring in his expression control, fighting against something raw, something that looked almost like pain. "It means," he said finally, "that if you were just a thing, I could let you go. But you're not. He stopped, jaw tight. "Get dressed. We're going somewhere." "I'm not going anywhere with you." "Yes, you are. You can't just..." "Zuena," her name in his mouth, quiet and certain. "Please." The please broke something in her. She went. Yun Pyo's Po. The orphanage looked the same as it always did. Junpyo pulled the car he was driving himself. No guards, no security, just him and Zuena in tense silence up to the modest building on the outskirts of Seoul and killed the engine. "What is this?" Zuena asked. First words she'd spoken in 30 minutes. "Where I grew up." He got out before she could respond. The courtyard was full of children, always was on Sunday mornings, and the moment they saw him, chaos erupted. 6 kids descended on him at once, shouting his name, grabbing his hands, his legs, his jacket, all talking over each other in rapid Korean. He crouched down to their level. Let them swarm him. "Did you bring candy?" The smallest one, a girl named Mi-sun, maybe 5 years old, demanded. "Maybe." "You always bring candy." "Then why are you asking?" She giggled and threw her arms around his neck. Jun Pyo lifted her easily, settling her on his hip while the other children danced around demanding their share. He produced a bag from his jacket, chocolate, imported, expensive, and distributed it with the kind of careful fairness that came from understanding scarcity. Over their heads, he found Zuena. She stood by the car, arms wrapped around herself, staring at him like she'd never seen him before. Maybe she hadn't. Sister Catherine appeared from the main building, elderly, kind-faced, the woman who'd raised him when no one else would. "Junpyo," she said warmly, pulling him into a hug. Mi-sun still attached to his hip. "It's been 3 weeks. I was starting to worry. Sorry, Uma. Work. Always work with you." She swatted his arm affectionately, then noticed Zuena. Her eyebrows rose. "And who is this?" "A friend." "A friend." Sister Catherine's smile went, knowing. "You've never brought a friend before." Because he'd never had one worth bringing. "Zuena," he called. "Come here." She approached slowly, uncertain, and he made introductions in English so she'd understand. "Sister Catherine runs this place," he explained. She's been here 30 years, raised half of Seoul's orphans, including me. You grew up here? Zuena asked quietly. From age 6 to 16, until I was old enough to make my own way. Make my own way times was a generous description of what he'd actually done. The fights, the stealing, the slow climb through Seoul's underworld until he'd built something that couldn't be torn down. But the children didn't need to know that. Sister Catherine didn't need to know that. They knew the version of him that sent money every month, that visited, that brought candy and fixed broken windows and made sure no child here ever felt as alone as he had. He's a good boy, Sister Catherine said to Zuena, patting Junpyo's cheek like he was still 16. Stubborn, too serious, but good. I'm not sure we're talking about the same person, Zuena murmured, but her eyes had softened. The visit stretched into hours. Junpyo let the children drag him around, showing him drawings, demanding he play soccer, asking for help with homework. Zuena sat on a bench in the courtyard and watched, and he was aware of her gaze the entire time, aware of what she was seeing, the parts of him that hadn't calcified into violence and control, the parts that remembered being small and scared and desperate for someone to choose him. He chose these children the way no one had chosen him. Every month, every visit, every window fixed and uniform bought and medical bill paid. It didn't erase what he was, but it was something. When they finally left, the sun was setting. Zuena was quiet as they drove back toward the city, but it was a different kind of quiet than before. Thank you, she said finally. He glanced at her. For what? For showing me that. I didn't do it for thanks. I know. She turned in her seat to face him. You did it because under all the dangerous, terrible things, you're still a little bit human. His laugh was short, surprised. A little bit. Don't push it. The corner of his mouth lifted. They drove in silence for a while. And then, unexpected, devastating, she reached across the center console and took his hand. Just held it. Her fingers warm and small in his, her thumb brushing over his knuckles. Junpyo's breath caught. He didn't pull away, didn't speak, just held her hand while Seoul glittered ahead and the orphanage disappeared behind, and something in his chest loosened for the first time in years. Junpyo, she said quietly. Yeah? I'm still angry about the club. I know, and I still think you're dangerous. I am dangerous, but I'm starting to understand why. She squeezed his hand, and that's terrifying. He knew exactly what she meant. The silence that followed was different. Charged but not hostile. Full of things neither of them knew how to say. Junpyo pulled into the mansion's drive and killed the engine but didn't let go of her hand. I have something to tell you, he said. Her body tensed. What? Your ex-husband. Baraka Osei. Just saying the name made Junpyo's jaw tight. What about him? Zuena's voice had gone carefully neutral. He's coming to Korea. Junpyo turned to face her fully. Applied for a contract with one of my tech companies. He'll be here for the final negotiations in 2 weeks. The color drained from her face. No, she whispered. No, I can't. I'm not ready to. Hey, he cupped her face with his free hand, forcing her to look at him. You don't have to see him. You don't have to do anything. I can kill the contract. Make him disappear. Say the word. She stared at him, eyes wide and dark. You'd do that? I'd do worse than that. He meant it. Would do worse. Wanted times to do worse. Just say the word. Teddy. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, no. No, don't kill the contract. Her voice steadied. I want to see him. I want him to see times me. What I've become. What he threw away. Pride surged through Junpyo's chest. That's my girl, he said softly. The words hung in the air. My girl. She didn't correct him. Chapter 10. The contract signing. The boardroom smelled like expensive coffee and expensive cologne and the particular tension of men trying to close a deal. Zuena sat at the conference table in a cream-colored suit that hugged her body leaner now, stronger, but still curved in all the ways she'd learned to love, and watched Baraka Osei talk. He'd been talking for 20 minutes, gesturing with his hands, smiling that smile she used to think was charming, pitching his Tanzanian tech startup like it was the next big thing, which they both knew it wasn't. But Junpyo's company had the resources to make times it the next big thing. If they wanted to, Baraka had no idea he was being played. Across the table, he kept glancing at her, smiling, trying to catch her eye. He didn't recognize her. She'd introduced herself as Amani Osei, her middle and last name, and he'd looked right at her. at this polished woman in designer clothes who spoke fluent Korean and carried herself like she owned the room, and he'd seen a stranger because the woman he'd abandoned at an airport, soft and broken and ashamed, no longer existed. Miss Osei, Baraka said now, leaning forward with that salesman charm. What do you think? Does our proposal interest you? Zuena smiled. I think it has potential. Beside her, she felt Junpyo shift. He'd attended every meeting, all 12 of them over the past 2 weeks, sitting at her right hand like a shadow with teeth, watching Baraka with the kind of focus that made grown men nervous. Baraka was nervous, kept tugging at his collar, kept looking at Junpyo like he couldn't figure out the power dynamic. Good, Zuena thought savagely. Be nervous. Excellent, Baraka said. Then shall we move forward with... Actually, Zuena interrupted. Before we finalize anything, I'd like to clarify something. Of course. She reached for her phone, tapped the screen. Behind Baraka, the conference room's presentation screen lit up, not with his pitch deck, with a photograph. Zuena at the airport, crying, wedding dress rumpled, mascara running. The exact moment Baraka had walked away, his face went white. What is... Another photo. The two of them on their wedding day, the first wedding, 2 years ago, her smiling wide, him looking at something off camera. Another, his family surrounding her at dinner, their expressions ranging from disdain to disgust. Another, text messages. Maybe if you lost some weight. My mother thinks you're lazy. Why can't you be more like... Stop, Baraka said, voice thin. Stop this right now. Why? Zuena stood, embarrassed. He was staring at her now, really staring, recognition dawning in slow, horrified stages. Zuena, hello, Baraka. The room went silent. Junpyo's executives, 4 of them, all in on the plan, watched with barely concealed fascination. You, Baraka looked between her and the screen. You look different? She smiled. I know. Turns out, when you're not being told you're worthless every day, you have time to become extraordinary. Another image appeared on the screen. Her in the gym, mid-deadlift, Michelle cheering in the background. Another, her at the coding competition she'd won last month, trophy in hand. Another, her and Dr. Park, presenting their AI research at a conference. Month by month, the transformation played out. And in the corner of each photo, a timestamp, 365 days. This is... Baraka stood abruptly. This is a setup. You can't... You're trying to humiliate me. No. Zuena's voice was perfectly calm. I'm showing you exactly what you lost. Behind the photos, new text appeared. Tsuvena Amani Oze, Senior Development Director. Tech Soul Corp. Lead AI Researcher. 6. Figure salary. Fluent in Korean, English, Swahili. Baraka's mouth opened, closed. Your contract, Zuena continued, was always going to be denied. This meeting was courtesy. A chance for you to see what happens when you throw away something precious because you're too small to recognize its value. Zuena, please. His phone rang. They all heard it, loud in the sudden silence. He looked at the screen, and his face went from white to grey. That's your mother, isn't it? Zuena asked. I sent her the live stream link. Told her you were about to sign your biggest deal. She's probably watching right now, along with your sisters, your friends, everyone you told about your big opportunity in Korea. Baraka's hands shook. Answer it, Zuena said. I can't. Then let it ring. The phone rang, and rang, and rang. Finally, Baraka grabbed it. Mama, Even across the table, Zuena could hear his mother's voice, shrill, furious, demanding he apologize, demanding he beg for forgiveness. Baraka's eyes met Zuena's, pleading. She felt nothing. No satisfaction, no triumph, no rage, just the quiet certainty that she'd become someone he couldn't touch anymore. He ended the call, set the phone down carefully. What do you want? He asked quietly. Money, an apology. I'll do whatever. I don't want anything from you. Zuena gathered her materials. You don't have anything I want. She turned to leave. Junpyo stood with her. And then in front of the executives, in front of Baraka, in front of the cameras still streaming live to Tanzania, he took her face in his hands and kissed her. The world narrowed to the taste of him. Mint and certainty and something deeper, something that tasted like forever. She kissed him back without hesitation, claimed him the way he was claiming her. When he pulled away, His forehead rested against hers, and he said quietly, just loud enough for her to hear, "I could bury him right where he stands. Just say the word, Teddy." She looked past Junpyo's shoulder to where Baraka sat frozen, face the color of ash, watching her slip completely beyond his reach. "Where's the fun in that?" she murmured. "Let him crave what he cannot have. That's the real torture." Junpyo's smile was devastating. "That's my girl." 3 months later, the yacht rocked gently on the water, Seoul's skyline glittering like a constellation behind them. Zhu Wenna stood at the railing, champagne in hand, wearing a red dress that made her feel like fire given form. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of salt and city and possibility. "Teddy," she turned. Junpyo stood behind her, hands in his pockets, looking at her with an expression she'd learned to read over months of slow burning, careful building, walls coming down brick by brick. "Love." It looked like love. "What?" she asked. "Come here." She set down her champagne and crossed to him, and he took her hands in his, thumbs brushing over her knuckles. 365 days ago, he said quietly, "I saw you crying in an airport, and I made you a promise to make me dangerous." "Yes, I think it worked." She smiled. "I'm terrifying now. You were always terrifying." His hands tightened on hers. "But that's not what I'm here to talk about." Her pulse quickened. "No? No." Then he dropped to one knee. The world stopped. Zuena's breath left in a rush, as Junpyo pulled a small box from his jacket, black velvet, glowing under yacht lights, and opened it to reveal a ring that looked like starlight, captured in platinum. "I brought you here to make you dangerous," he said, voice rough. "You made me times human. You made me want things I'd stopped letting myself want. You made me believe I could be something other than what the world tried to make me." Tears blurred her vision. "Zuena Amani Osei," he continued, "you're the bravest person I've ever met, the smartest, the most beautiful, and if you'll let me, I want to spend the rest of my life proving that kidnapping you was the best decision I ever made." She laughed through tears. "That's the worst proposal I've ever heard. Is that a no?" "That's a yes, you idiot." He slid the ring onto her finger, perfect fit. Because of course it was. Because he paid attention to everything and stood, pulling her into his arms. The kiss was soft this time, gentle, full of promise instead of possession. When they broke apart, she touched his face, traced the sharp line of his jaw, and said, 365 days ago, you kidnapped me. Today, I'm choosing to stay. Best choice you ever made." "Maybe," she grinned. "But Junpyo." "Yeah? I'm keeping the nickname." His laugh rumbled through his chest, and he pulled her closer, and Seoul glittered around them like it had been waiting for this moment all along. Zuena Amani Osei, dangerous, brilliant, and entirely her own, had come to Korea in pieces. She was leaving whole, and she was taking him with her.